Before we start, a quick note about what this channel is and what it isn't. This isn't a recap channel, and it's not a highlight reel. We're here for the parts of Panem that happen after the cameras turn away, the systems behind the games, the contracts hidden inside victory, the lives that keep unfolding long after the anthem ends. Each video on this channel is built to slow things down, to follow the logic the capital relies on, the details it hopes you won't connect, and the people who live with the consequences year after year. If that's the kind of Hunger Games analysis you're looking for, you're in the right place. Subscribing just means you'll keep a seat here when we move on to the next story. Now, let's start where Panem always wants you to stop paying attention. You remember the mockingjay pin, a tiny bird in a circle, gold, delicate, almost harmless. But here's the real question. Why does this little piece of jewelry exist at all? The pin only means something because the Hunger Games exist. No arena, no tribute, no televised deathmatch, no mockingjay pin. So what larger system is this cute symbol actually a symptom of? At face value, the answer seems obvious. The capital tells you the games are punishment for the dark days. A reminder carved into the calendar so every district remembers what happens if you rebel. One boy, one girl, every year on screen. You're told it's simple. They hurt your children so you stay in line. But if the capital only wanted fear, why go to all this trouble? Why build an arena every single year? Ship tributes by train, dress them, train them, televise them, bet on them, interview them. There are cheaper, quieter, far more efficient ways to terrorize 12 districts than a national murder reality show with sponsors and costume changes. So why the games in this specific form? Why the parades, the ratings, the stylists? Why turn tributes into characters the capital can root for? There is a lot to uncover here because the answer has to be big enough to justify the cost, the risk, and the constant instability that comes with making rebellion entertainment. Here's the real question underneath the punishment story. What is so valuable to the capital that it keeps this machine running for 75 years? What are they harvesting that's worth the danger of giving every district a shared ritual of grief and rage? And how does that connect to the way a victor ends up in a mansion in Victor's village instead of disappearing back into the coal mines or the orchards? This is where we talk about contradiction. On paper, the games are supposed to crush hope. Your children are statistically doomed. Your district is permanently beneath the capital's boot. But the same system that kills most tributes also creates celebrities. It builds mansions on a hill, fills them with hot water and full pantries, and hands one person from your district the tiniest promise of escape. If you're a kid watching the reaping, what do you actually see? Terror, yes, but also the possibility that you somehow could be the one in the fancy house, never worrying about Tesserae again. Any victor will tell you the games don't end when you win. Yet the capital keeps dangling that 1 in thousands chance in front of every district child. That part matters because it means the games aren't just about punishment, they're about managing desire, turning hope into a leash. The mockingjay pin doesn't just stand for rebellion later, it starts as merchandise for a system that teaches you to fear the arena and secretly dream of surviving it. And that contradiction is the key to understanding how Panem's entire power structure really works. When victory isn't freedom, why this matters. So once you turn hope into a leash, what do you do next? You build a collar. That collar is Victor's village. To see why this matters, you have to go back to the early games, especially before the 10th. Back then, the arena is barely an arena. It's a ruined sports stadium, broken rubble, no fancy mutts, no flaming chariots. The punishment is raw and obvious. Your children die on camera to remind you who won the war. That's it. No promise, no glamour, just terror. But by the time you reach Katniss's era, the whole thing has been polished into a nationwide obsession. Costumes, stylists, sponsors, interviews. The capital spends an absurd amount of money turning murder into a reality show. So here's the real question. If fear was enough, why upgrade? Why add parades, love stories, and luxury suburbs for the winners? At face value, Victor's village looks merciful. You survive, you get a mansion, your family eats, you never work another day in the mines or the fields. Children in every district can point to those houses and say, that's what happens if you win. But that part matters because winning doesn't actually release you from the games. It just changes your role. Haymitch is the clearest example. He wins the 50th games, comes home to a big empty house, and then spends the rest of his life mentoring children who mostly die. He drinks because he's trapped in the same logic that almost killed him. Outwit, outlast. Watch them fall. Katniss and Peter move into their perfect homes, but they're still on call for tours, propaganda, and those staged interviews where their trauma is turned into entertainment. So why reward victors at all? Why separate them into special neighborhoods instead of just giving them nicer apartments with everyone else? Why keep them on display in houses with full power and stocked pantries, while their neighbors line up for tesserae and starve? Why make the comfort so visible, but so unreachable? There is a lot to uncover here. Victor's village is a constant psychological weapon pointed at the district. It says, the games are horrible, yes, but they are also your best shot at a good life. It reshapes how people think about risk and sacrifice. Dying in the arena becomes tragic but meaningful. Volunteering starts to sound rational if it might pull your entire family out of poverty. This is where we talk about victory as a job, not a finish line. Victors become mentors, salespeople for capital narratives, and living reminders that the system sometimes rewards obedience and spectacle. The village is the office where they report for duty. And when the third quarter quell reaps from existing victors, that office turns into a trapdoor. The illusion that the mansion equals safety evaporates overnight. If the capital can drag you back after you've sold your whole life to their story, what is the reward really worth? Hold on to that question, because next we're going to cover how the physical design and placement of these villages turns that uneasy promise into everyday, inescapable propaganda. The capital's magic trick, a mansion that's really a cage, so when the capital rips that reward away in the quarter quell, it isn't just cruel, it exposes the trick. Because here's the real question. What if the Hunger Games were never primarily about punishing the first rebellion at all, but about building a world where a second rebellion becomes statistically and psychologically unlikely, not impossible through brute force, but unlikely through design, through habit, through hope that's been wired in the wrong direction? Victor's village is the cleanest window into that design. At face value, it's the dream, a mansion, hot water, full cupboards, distance from the mines or the fields. Kids in your district can literally point to those houses and say, if I win, that's my future. But this is where we talk about what those houses really are. They're not just rewards, they're a controlled environment, a lab where the capital grows symbols, tests narratives, and keeps its most dangerous survivors on a very short leash. Think about the promise versus the reality. On paper, you're exempt from the reaping, from labor, from hunger. Your family is safe. Your district gets extra food when you win. That part matters because it shifts the emotional math. Instead of only fearing the games, people start quietly calculating the upside. Maybe your child is talented. Maybe volunteering doesn't sound so insane. Snow himself talks about a little hope being useful, and Victor's village is that promise made concrete. But from the capital's perspective, those same houses do the opposite of freedom. You're isolated from your district, easy to watch, easy to summon. You mentor every year, pulling you back into the spectacle. You owe interviews, parties, propaganda tours. Your trauma becomes a renewable resource the games can harvest on schedule. The relationship is clear. You're not retired. You're on lifetime contract. So for the rest of this video, we're going to cover the games as a political technology, not just a punishment. Part psychological warfare, tesserae, reapings, the way every family has skin in the lottery. Part economic system, districts stay poor, dependent, and profitable while the capital turns children's deaths into ratings and luxury. Part cultural engineering, victors turned into celebrities, love stories and talent segments smoothing over the brutality underneath. There is a lot to uncover here. Snow's early career and the 10th games where these ideas are still crude experiments. How career districts and volunteering were engineered once the capital realized aspiration is more efficient than terror. And crucially, why the system eventually fails, why Katniss, Peter, and that third quarter quell twist don't just break a rule, they break the underlying spell. Because once you see that the mansion is a cage, you start asking a much more dangerous question. If the reward is a lie, what else about the games has been fabricated? And that's where the entire structure of Panem starts to shake. You'll map through Panem's favorite blood sport, so to answer that dangerous question, we need a map. Because the games aren't random cruelty, they're a system. And Victor's village is one of its cleanest blueprints. So in the rest of this video, we're going to cover how that blueprint gets drawn, upgraded, and eventually turned against the capital. First, we go back to the beginning of the modern games. Not the dark days, but the 10th Hunger Games, when everything is still ugly, cheap, and failing as propaganda. This is where we talk about Coriolanus Snow before the Roses, when he's a broke academy student trying to solve a political problem. How do you make people care about a punishment ritual? We'll walk through how his ideas about mentors, spectacle, and rewards slowly harden into the thing we recognize, and how Victor's village emerges as the physical promise that winning means a different life. That part matters because once you see Snow treating hope as a design feature, you understand why the mansions exist at all. Then we shift into the mechanics. How does the relationship between the village and the games actually work year after year? Why does putting 12 fancy houses on a hill start to tempt better tributes out of districts that should know better? We'll break down how food deliveries, district feasts, and exemption from the reaping turn terror into something closer to a lottery jackpot. At face value, it's generosity. Underneath, it's the capital quietly normalizing volunteering and training, especially in places where children were never supposed to see themselves as potential victors. From there, we're going comparative. District 12 becomes our control group, a place where volunteering almost never happens, where the village stands half empty and haunted. We'll contrast that with the career districts, the capital's ideal outcome, where the games are practically a sport and the village is a recruiting poster. And because there is a lot to uncover here, we'll speculate about those mid-tier districts we never really see on the page. What does Victor's village mean in, say, a textiles district or a fishing district where one victor's wealth can quietly tear a community's class structure in half? After that, we zoom out into the meta. Here's the real question. Why does the capital allow volunteers at all if fear is the point? We'll talk about Snow's "A Little Hope" speech and treat it almost mathematically. How much fear, how much hope, how much spectacle do you need to keep rebellion improbable? This is where we talk about the games as a curriculum, teaching every child in Panem which futures are possible. Miner, peacekeeper, or if you're very lucky and very lethal, victor celebrity under surveillance. And finally, we end on speculation and payoff. We'll imagine how each district's victor's village probably looks and functions based on its industry. coal mansions with reinforced cellars, fishing villas that smell permanently of salt, maybe a tech district with smart houses the capital can monitor in real time. Then we close on the real harvest, because the games don't just take lives, they harvest imagination. What you dare to want and what you stop believing can ever change. And once that harvest fails, the arena stops being a cage and becomes a spark. Welcome to Victor's Village. What we do here, so if the games are harvesting imagination, where does this channel fit in? This is where we talk about what happens when you refuse to play along with the capital's script, even if it's just in your head. If you're new here, the quick version is this: we live in Panem, or at least, we treat it that way. Every episode, we zoom in on some piece of this system: the games, the districts, the victors, the capital, and pull it apart as if we're historians studying a very real, very broken country. At face value, it's fandom. Underneath, it's political autopsy. So when we ask why Victor's Village exists, we're not just ranking the mansions, we're going to cover the power structure that decides who gets a warm shower and who gets a whipping post. One week, that means breaking down how Tesserae mathematically traps poor families in the reaping. Another week, it's the psychology of volunteering in District 2, or why Katniss and Peter's star-crossed lovers narrative was the capital's favourite weapon, until it suddenly wasn't. The style here is pretty simple: curious, analytical, but fast. We treat the books and films as primary sources: surveillance footage, propaganda reels, memoirs smuggled out of the districts. There is a lot to uncover here when you read a Caesar Flickerman interview as state media instead of comic relief. That part matters because once you do, the games stop being a YA plot device and start looking uncomfortably familiar. Across the channel, you'll see that pattern. We've mapped out how arena design evolves from blunt punishment to sophisticated psychological warfare. We've tracked district economies, why 12 starves while 1 and 2 produce career victors on purpose. We've done character studies on Haymitch as a failed piece of propaganda, on Seneca Crane as a mid-level bureaucrat who misunderstands hope, and on Snow as someone trying to make rebellion statistically impossible. So if you're the kind of person who wants to know not just what happens, but why a system was built that way, this is your district. If picking apart fictional institutions helps you see the relationship between Panem and our own world a little more clearly, I'd invite you to stay, join the community, and keep coming back when we post new reports from the games. And start thinking ahead, because here's the real question I want you to carry into the rest of this video. If you had to be from one district, which would it be? And how would your district quietly resist the logic of the games? Would you rig the quotas, sabotage shipments, turn victors into local heroes instead of capital property? Hold on to your answer. We're going to come back to that in the comments prompt, once we finish unpacking what Victor's Village is really doing to the people who live there. From disaster to design, the 10th game's as turning point, so to really understand why Victor's Village exists at all, you have to rewind to a version of the Hunger Games that barely deserves the name. Before the 10th games, this wasn't a national event, it was a chore, a line item on the capital's punishment spreadsheet. Back then, the arena was just a ruined stadium. No fancy force fields, no mutts, no stylists. Tributes were dumped in half-starved, filthy, and anonymous. Even the capital audience struggled to remember their names. Why invest emotionally when the whole thing felt more detention than drama? And that part matters because the original purpose was simple: remind the districts who won the war. At face value, that sounds efficient. You rebel, we take your kids. But here's the real question. If punishment alone is enough, why is no one really watching? Why are the districts numb instead of terrified? Why is the capital itself bored? The 10th games expose that crisis. The tributes are so weak, Some can barely stand. Several die off-screen from illness and neglect. The districts aren't psychologically invested. They resent the games, but they don't obsess over them. There is fear, sure, but no twisted anticipation, no hope of maybe this year our district wins. Without that emotional hook, the system is unstable. The capital is killing children, but it isn't harvesting anything useful from their deaths. This is where we talk about Coriolanus Snow before the roses and the presidency, when he's just an ambitious academy student with a collapsing family fortune and a scholarship on the line. His class project turned the games into something the capital actually cares about. His survival is directly tied to making the games entertaining. So Snow and his classmates start experimenting. They introduce betting so capital citizens suddenly have a reason to pick favorites. They create a sponsor system so rich viewers can send food or medicine, turning survival into a relationship between tribute and audience. They add interviews, dressing tributes up, putting them on stage, asking questions that turn them into characters, not just bodies being fed into rubble. We're going to cover how this becomes the blueprint for the modern spectacle, the pageantry you see with Caesar Flickerman, the way Katniss and Peter's star-crossed lovers act can literally change who lives or dies. But it starts here, with a homework assignment that accidentally redesigns Panem. Once you do that, you hit a new problem. If a tribute is now a character, what happens after they win? You can't just send a victor back to a rotting shack in District 12 and hope the story keeps selling. Their life has to look like the payoff the capital keeps promising. Snow's system needs a stage that doesn't end when the games do. A place where victors can be displayed, rewarded, and controlled year after year. And that's the gap Victor's Village is built to fill. But the way it fills that gap, and the price victors pay to live there, is much darker than the brochures would suggest. Snow's career move. Inventing a palatable atrocity, Snow's system needs a stage. But it also needs a director. This is where we talk about Coriolanus Snow not just as the villain in The White Rose, but as the one person who really understands the limits of terror. Raw fear works at first. You bomb District 13, you stage the first Hunger Games, everyone is horrified. But here's the real question. What happens in year 10, year 20? People adapt. They go numb. Or they decide they'd rather die fighting than watch their children die on television. Snow sees that coming. He's a political strategist long before he's the president. Back in his own prequel story, he learns the most important lesson of his career. If the games are only a punishment, they're unstable. If they're entertaining, they're permanent. You don't just remember your defeat, you schedule your emotions around it. You host viewing parties. You pick favorites. You argue about odds instead of asking why the games exist at all. That part matters because it turns the arena into a national ritual instead of a yearly war crime. At face value, you're watching kids fight. Underneath, you're being trained to invest emotionally in the capital's narrative. Every cheer for a clever kill is a tiny vote of confidence in the system that made it possible. And Snow's personal situation makes him obsessed with that surface story. He grows up poor but technically elite, clinging to a famous name while his family is literally starving. So what does he learn? Appearances are everything. If you can control what people see, you can control what they believe. His whole relationship to power is about presentation. The perfect suit, the calm voice, the carefully staged interview. The games are just that philosophy scaled up to a country. So he redesigns them. Capital citizens need glamour, drama, and the promise of novelty. Every year, districts need something else. Just enough hope that participation feels rational. Why send your children to slaughter if there is no upside at all? Why keep watching if the outcome is only despair? Snow's answer is brutal and brilliant. You give them a victor, We're going to cover how Victor's village pays that off, but the idea starts here. You turn one child per district into proof that the system can work for you. Your district gets food. You get temporary celebrations. Your victor gets wealth, safety from the reaping, and a house everyone can see, but almost no one can touch. Victor's village becomes the next logical step in Snow's design, a permanent advertisement built on a hill, lit up with full power, saying, "Yes, your children might die, but they might also live like this." It's cruel math, but it keeps the games going. And once you understand that, you can see why breaking that promise later is what finally breaks the capital's control. Building the village. Why put the mansions in the dirt? So once Snow has his glowing billboard on the hill, the next step is obvious. You don't just reward a victor, you build around them. This is where we talk about timing, because the timeline really matters. After the 10th games, once Lucy Gray and the experimental arena prove that spectacle can move public opinion, the capital stops treating the games as a messy, improvised punishment and starts standardizing the whole ecosystem. Arenas get purpose-built, mentors become a formal role, and right alongside that, housing for victors turns from a vague promise into an actual blueprint. Back then, a winner might just go home to whatever shack or tenement they came from. So why the change? Why spend capital money on matching mansions in every district instead of just keeping the victors in the capital forever, where surveillance is easier and the parties are better? At face value, relocating them to the city of excess would be the safer move. But here's the real question. What good is a success story if no one back home can see it? Snow needs every district child to grow up staring at proof that the system can work for them. That part matters because the games are supposed to offer not just terror, but a tiny, weaponized hope. If victors vanish into the capital, the relationship between sacrifice and reward gets fuzzy. If they stay in the dirt, in their own district, the equation is brutally clear. So the capital drops a miniature suburb right on the edge of town. In District 12, it's on a hill, cleaner streets, glass windows, constant electricity when everyone else is cooking over coal. But it's not a real escape. It's still behind district fences, under peacekeeper patrols, within range of every siren and every crackdown. A gilded edge, not a different map. There is a lot to uncover here. By clustering victors, Snow creates a little colony of people who owe everything to the capital. Your house, your food, your heating, your family's safety, every part of that mansion whispers, "Remember who gave this to you." That's the political reason for the village. These people become built-in influencers, the local celebrities who show up at harvest festivals, mentor in the games, and quietly report anything suspicious they see. And if they don't cooperate, that same concentration makes them easy to threaten, easy to monitor, easy to repunish in something like the third quarter quell. So we're going to cover the mechanics next, but pause here. If Victor's village is the carrot, how exactly is it supposed to rewire the way parents tuck their kids in before a reaping, and the way those kids dream about the arena? Tempting tributes. How the village rewrites the odds. So here's where Victor's village stops being background set dressing and starts messing with people's brains. Snow tells us his goal outright in the prequel era. The games need a better class of tributes, not half-starved kids dragged in screaming. Stronger bodies, bigger personalities, people who will play along on camera. At face value, that sounds almost humane, right? Better odds, better conditions. But here's the real question. How do you convince terrified districts to start supplying you with exactly the kind of children who make better television? You don't just threaten them, you tempt them. Victor's village is the visible promise. If you win, you don't just make it home in one piece. You get the nicest house in the district, permanent food security, hot water, appliances that always work. Your family moves from the seam to the hill, from the slag heap to the clean street. Every child walking past those empty houses in District 12 is seeing an argument. The games are horrific, but they are also, technically, a way out. There is a lot to uncover here, because that part matters more than the marble countertops. Once that promise exists, the reaping isn't just a death sentence lottery anymore. It's a twisted jackpot. Someone's child will die, but someone's child will win, and the capital is counting on you to quietly wonder which side your family might land on. Back in the earliest games, tributes are random kids with no prep, no strategy, barely understanding the rules. So why the change? The moment you build Victor's Village, the psychology shifts. In the career districts, that promise fuses with existing privilege. Parents start training their kids on purpose. Volunteering becomes a rational gamble. Years of combat drills in exchange for a real shot at a mansion, fame, and immunity from future reapings. This is where we talk about the better class of tributes Snow wanted. You get kids who are not only physically prepared, but mentally invested. They enter the arena already thinking in sponsor angles, alliances, quotable lines. They've rehearsed interviews in front of broken mirrors, knowing that charisma now has a material relationship to whether their siblings ever go hungry again. And in poorer districts, the effect is quieter but just as corrosive. Families who would never say it out loud start doing the math. Is there one child who's faster, sharper, more charming on camera? If the odds are terrible anyway, is there a tiny shameful hope that this child could save everyone by becoming a victor? That's psychological warfare. The village doesn't cancel fear, it overlays fear with desire. The games stop being a pure terror ritual and become a nightmare lottery where someone has to win. And once you accept that, the next step is brutal but logical. You start preparing to win. Keep that in mind, because next we need to look at what happens when the prize itself turns out to be a trap. From starving kids to reality TV stars. So when the prize is a trap, the next question is, how do you convince people to chase it anyway? This is where we talk about the games as entertainment, because that part matters more than the arenas themselves. Back in the early years, the tributes we hear about are basically ghosts. You don't know their names, you barely know their districts. They go in underfed, untrained, and they die fast in arenas that are brutal but boring to watch. It's punishment as scheduled slaughter, not a show. And if no one wants to watch, the whole system has a problem. Why pour capital money into a spectacle that even capital citizens are tuning out of? Why keep risking unrest in the districts for an event that doesn't deliver on the one thing Snow actually needs from it? Attention. Here's the real question. How do you turn anonymous child murder into appointment television? You start giving the victims roles. Suddenly, we're in the modern era of the games. Tributes arrive in the capital, and the first thing that happens is not training, it's styling. Costumes, chariots. You get Cinna, Portia, all these stylists turning half-starved kids into walking symbols of their district. At face value, it's glamour. Underneath, it's rebranding. A tribute stops being a frightened 12-year-old from District 11 and becomes the girl on fire, or the career golden boy with the perfect training score. We're going to cover the training center more later, but notice the pipeline. Training scores, televised sessions, Caesar Flickerman interviews, tragic backstories, fake romances. The capital audience is handed a menu of personalities to root for or against. The games don't erase individuality, they package it. That's the reason you, as a viewer in universe, can say, "Oh, I remember that Victor from the year with the mutts," instead of, "Some kid died once." And Victor's Village is what locks that in. Without it, Victors would vanish back into the mines, the orchards, the factories, and the narrative would reset every year. With it, the capital keeps its favorite characters on retainer. They come back as mentors. They appear on talk shows. They sit in the stands during training, reacting to the new crop of tributes. Every season of the games now has guest stars. There is a lot to uncover here about the relationship between architecture and memory. Those 12 houses in each district are not just rewards, they're storage units for storylines. Capital citizens get serialized storytelling. Will Haymitch sober up enough to mentor? Will Finnick's protege live up to his legacy? The games become a long-running series with callbacks, running jokes, and emotional payoffs anchored in those villages. And for the districts, the cruel twist is that it starts to look almost rational. You see a clear career path, get reaped, or volunteer, survive the arena, retire to a mansion with hot water and steady food. On paper, there's a promise there. Hope, even. But here's the real question. If this is a career, why is the entry requirement being a child in a death match? That part matters because once the games feel like a job with benefits, it becomes easier for everyone, capital and district alike, to ignore that the core task is murder. The spectacle smooths the horror. The village gives the horror an address. And Snow isn't done yet, because next we have to look at how he keeps those retired victors working long after the cameras stop rolling. Volunteering wasn't a glitch. It was the feature, and Snow isn't done with the victors, but he's also not done with you, because once you build a suburban reward track for murder, another strange thing appears on screen every year. People start raising their hands. So here's the real question. Why would a regime that supposedly wants total obedience allow children to step forward and choose to enter a death arena? If the whole point is terror, wouldn't it be more effective if no one had any way out, no chance for someone to shout, "I volunteer," and rewrite the script? At face value, volunteering looks like a glitch in the system, a crack of agency in an otherwise locked machine. But this is where we talk about design. The village, the tours, the interviews, the promise of a house with hot water and full pantries. Those are not just rewards, they are inputs. They create conditions where, for some families, volunteering stops feeling insane and starts feeling rational. Think about the career districts. 1. For decades, kids there have grown up watching the same story on their screens. Victors from their own streets, coming home to mansions, training centers, funded whole districts getting extra food and celebrations. There is a lot to uncover here in that relationship between public luxury and private desperation. If your family is poor but proud, if your district worships winners as heroes, is it really that hard to see why a 17-year-old might say, if someone has to go, it should be me, and I might actually win? The games' celebrity culture does the rest. You don't just die or survive. You become a narrative. You're a lover, a warrior, a martyr, a symbol. The capital's cameras turn tributes into brands, and brands feel safer than victims. That part matters because once volunteering is wrapped in honor and story, it stops looking like coerced sacrifice and starts reading as noble service. And politically, that's gold. When a tribute steps forward, the capital can point and say, "See? They're not just forced, they want to compete." The line between coercion and choice blurs on purpose. Fear pushes from behind, hope dangles in front, and somewhere in the middle, a kid raises their hand and everyone pretends this was a free decision. Snow doesn't just get obedience, he gets participation. So why even allow volunteers? Because volunteers are the proof of concept that the whole spectacle works. They show that the village and the cameras have successfully turned a punishment into an aspiration. But what happens when the formula fails? What happens in a district where the village never really fills? where the games are so hated, so unwinnable, that no one in their right mind volunteers until Katniss. In other words, what does the capital do with a place like District 12 where the hand doesn't go up? We need to talk about that next. District 12. The village no one moves into District 12 is where the capital's beautiful theory runs into a brick wall. You hike up that hill outside the seam, and what do you find? Not a glittering symbol of hope. An empty subdivision. Victor's Village in 12 is basically a ghost estate with good plumbing. At the start of the series, there are 12 houses in the books, all wired, all stocked, all ready for a parade of champions, and only Haymitch is in residence. One drunk, one decaying house, and 11 monuments to a promise the capital could never cash here. At face value, Victor's Village is supposed to whisper, "This could be yours." But in 12, no one is listening. Why would they? The coal dust, the starvation, the daily struggle in the mines create a district where the games don't become a career path. They stay exactly what they were intended to be at the beginning: a death sentence. Parents in 12 aren't training children with swords in the backyard. They're teaching them how to snare rabbits and not die of pneumonia. This is where we talk about incentives failing. The entire relationship between Victor's Village and the districts depends on people having spare bandwidth to dream. Career districts can afford that. District 12 can't. When you're wondering if you'll eat tonight, a distant mansion you'll probably never live in is about as motivating as a capital history lesson. There is a lot to uncover here, because the capital built the same structure everywhere and assumed the psychology would copy-paste. But here's the real question. What happens when no one volunteers? In 12, the reaping stays pure terror. No, I'll take her place. No siblings stepping forward to chase glory. Until Katniss, the hand never goes up. That part matters because it means the games never become a twisted opportunity. They remain a random harvest. So Victor's Village doesn't read as a goal. It reads as a bad joke the capital forgot to finish. And then there's Haymitch, your one victor. Your supposed success story, instead of a charming local celebrity, he's a walking anti-advertisement. He lives alone, house trashed, permanently drunk, openly hostile to capital authority. Every child in 12 can see the equation: win the games, come home, drink yourself numb. Why would anyone in that district believe the promise that victory equals happiness when the only data point is clearly miserable? Pattern interrupt. When Katniss finally moves there, it still doesn't work. You'd expect the fairy tale ending. New house, full pantry, warm fireplace. But she experiences it as exile. Her family is ripped out of the scene community and dropped into a surveillance bubble at the edge of town. Peacekeepers watch. Capital phones ring. Snow's roses arrive. The games didn't end. They changed address. So why keep maintaining 12's empty village? Because even failing infrastructure sends a message. To 12, it's a reminder that the odds are never in their favor. To the capital, it's a backup stage, waiting for the day their system finally produces more victors. Or the day they need those empty houses for something much darker, which we're going to cover when we get to the bombing of 12 and why the village is the only thing that survives. Katniss. The wrong kind of volunteer. Those empty houses in District 12's Victor's Village are already unsettling. But they become something else entirely the second Katniss fills one of them. Because here's the real question. What happens when the capital's dream tenant never wanted the mansion in the first place? This is where we talk about the reaping, not the abstract idea of it, but that exact moment. Prin's name, the stunned silence, and Katniss's scream cutting through the square. She doesn't step forward with poise. She doesn't raise her hand as a career move. She shoves through the crowd, barely coherent, and volunteers out of raw panic and love. It's not a strategy. It's a reflex. Keep Prem alive, no matter what. At face value, the capital loves a volunteer. The system is built to reward that. But the kind of volunteer they're expecting is very different. Effie immediately tries to translate what just happened into capital language. So brave, so exciting. The cameras zoom in. The audience is told this is drama, this is noble sacrifice, this is premium games content. Notice what gets erased. The fact that Katniss is essentially saying, your system is unacceptable, but I will bleed myself out to shield my sister from it. There is a lot to uncover here about motive. Career tributes from Districts 1, 2, and 4 volunteer because they've been raised on a very specific promise. Train hard, win glory, secure wealth, move your family into that gleaming house on the hill. Victor's village is sold to them as social mobility, with marble countertops. You risk death now, so that statistically, your bloodline might escape the reaping forever. Katniss doesn't believe in that relationship at all. She's from 12, where volunteering is practically unheard of because the odds are already brutal and no one trusts the capital's promise of safety. When she steps forward, she isn't thinking about the village, or sponsorships, or becoming a victor. She's thinking very narrowly, not prim. That part matters because it breaks the core logic Snow is relying on, that people will internalize the games as a twisted opportunity. So when she actually wins and moves into Victor's village, the reward doesn't land. The house is huge, warm, fully stocked, but it's also almost entirely empty. Only a handful of homes are occupied. The rest are dark shells, quiet reminders of how many children never came back. Katniss is isolated from her district, watched by peacekeepers, monitored by phones that go straight to the capital. The village becomes a stage set, and she's the traumatized lead forced to keep performing. Her nightmares, Peter's prosthetic leg, Haymitch's decaying house, the mandatory mentoring every year. None of this says freedom, it says the games never end. Victor's village keeps replaying the arena in architectural form, and when the third quarter quell threatens to send her back, the illusion that this neighborhood equals safety completely collapses. So why does Katniss matter so much to our question about why Victor's village exists? Because she's proof the system can misfire. When a volunteer doesn't buy the dream, when a victor refuses to be grateful, that luxury district on the hill stops being aspirational and starts looking sinister. Children in 12 aren't seeing a happy ending, they're seeing a haunted house with a girl who won't smile on cue. And the capital notices. That's why Snow keeps tightening the leash. Why every interview, every tour, every appearance is about forcing her back into their script. The more she resists, the more the village turns from advertisement into evidence. Evidence that the games can produce symbols of rebellion instead of compliance. So if Katniss breaks the model from the inside, what does the capital do next? To answer that, we need to look at how they weaponize Victor's bodies and private lives far beyond the arena, and why the village becomes a pipeline into something even darker, the districts we never see. Filling in the blanks so when the capital turns victors into weapons, that's the part we see up close with Katniss and the other celebrities. But here's the real question. What about the districts we never really visit? What does this whole village plus game system look like in the places that are neither starving coal pits nor polished career factories? Because our camera is biased, we live in 12, we glimpse 11, and we spend time with 1, 2, and 4. That skews your sense of what normal Panem even is. At face value, it can feel like there are only 2 modes: total desperation or bloodthirsty volunteering. But statistically, most people are not in those extremes. Districts 5, 6, 9, 10, the industrial, transport, and agriculture workhorses are where the system has to quietly function without constant crisis. This is where we talk about mixed incentives, In a mid-tier district, you probably don't have kids training from age 5 with swords, but you also aren't in 12, where volunteering is unheard of. Fear is still the baseline. Nobody wants their child in the arena. But the promise of a victor, extra food, celebrations, better rations, maybe a temporary easing of peacekeeper pressure, creates a thin layer of hope on top of that fear. So do you occasionally get a volunteer? Probably, but for different reasons. Maybe a transport kid in 6 who's used to long hours and pills thinks endurance is a skill. Maybe a strong farmhand in 10 believes wrestling livestock translates into arena survival. We actually get hints of this in canon. District 4 has clear career energy by catching fire, but even 5 and 6 send tributes who know how to use their environment, who can cooperate, who aren't as helpless as 12's early lambs to the slaughter. There is a lot to uncover here. That part matters because it suggests semi-career subcultures, not open training academies, but quiet traditions. An uncle who teaches you to throw under the excuse of hunting vermin. A factory foreman who runs fitness drills that just happen to map onto arena logic. Now zoom out to the victors' villages in those places. You're not getting marble fountains and glittering plazas. You're getting a slightly elevated cul-de-sac with intact electricity, painted shutters, maybe a small garden that actually grows flowers instead of grain. Half the houses are empty. 1 or 2 are occupied by victors who keep their curtains half closed because their relationship to the district is complicated. They're symbols of both survival and collaboration. So why build those villages there at all? Because the capital doesn't need every district to behave like 1 and 2. It just needs enough variation to keep the games unpredictable and watchable. A terrified district, a proud district, a resigned district, a quietly hopeful district. That mix is the content strategy. When a mid-tier victor appears, they prove the system works, even in ordinary places. When they die in a quarter quell, they prove nowhere is safe. And the real twist, those half-empty villages might be the capital's most fragile assets. Because what happens when the people living around them stop seeing promise and start seeing targets? How POV tricks us. Panem beyond Katniss's eyes, so when we talk about those half-empty villages turning into targets, we have to pause and ask, targets from whose point of view? Because here's the real question. Have we been judging the success of the games using Katniss's eyes when she's literally the worst possible sample? District 12 is the control group from hell. It's the poorest district, the farthest from the capital, and one of the few places where volunteering basically doesn't exist. At face value, Katniss's reaping feels normal for Panem. Silent crowd, no cheering, no sense of promise, just dread. But that part matters because for a lot of other districts, the relationship to the reaping and the village is very different. This is where we talk about point of view as a weapon. The books are locked to Katniss's first-person narration. We only see other districts in quick flashes. A girl in an orange dress from 5, the fragile morphling victors from 6, the stoic lumber tribute from 7. Most of what you know about Panem is filtered through a traumatized teenager from the most anti-games district in the country. So what are we missing? We don't stand in District 1's square when a volunteer steps forward to applause. We don't walk through their victor's village when every house is full and every child can name each victor's signature weapon. We get the training center, the parade, the interviews, but we experience them as Katniss's humiliation and terror, not as data about how everyone else has already internalized the system. Rewatch the training center through a world builder brain. Notice how the careers move through the room. They're at home. They treat the games as a sport, as a career path in the most literal sense. That doesn't happen unless back home their villages are functioning as aspirational suburbs, not haunted graveyards. Same with the tribute parade. Katniss focuses on the fire dress, on feeling exposed, on Peter's hand. But scan the edges. Some districts are waving, smiling, playing to the cameras. From the Capitol's vantage point, that's the metric that matters. Are the tributes performing? Are the districts sending children who know the script? Even the interviews tell on Panem. Caesar Flickerman isn't just there to be ridiculous, he's the ritual priest of the games. When a tribute cracks jokes or flirts, that's a sign their district has partially absorbed the games as tradition, as an annual chance at attention and reward. You're supposed to see Katniss as the outlier, because she is. So, from Snow's office, the system looks far more successful than it does from the seam. Most districts aren't openly rebelling. They're negotiating. They fear the games, but they also invest in them, train for them, hope for a victor who will upgrade their rations and move into that shining house on the hill. Which sets up the next question. If some districts fully embrace that promise, what does Victor's Village look like there? In a place where the games are tradition instead of trauma, how does that little suburb actually function day to day? Career districts. When the system works too well, in districts 1, 2, and 4, you don't have to imagine what happens if that promise actually lands. You just walk past the training center. This is where we talk about the so-called career districts. At face value, they're just wealthier regions whose kids are stronger, better fed, more prepared. But here's the real question. What does it mean when children aren't just resigned to the games, they're actively aiming for them? In these districts, becoming a tribute is a career path, not a death sentence. You grow up in District 2 hearing stories about past champions the way other places talk about old miners or factory hands. There is a lot to uncover here because the entire pipeline is inverted. Kids train from a young age with weapons, hand-to-hand combat, survival drills. They study old broadcasts the way you might study game tape for a sport. Volunteering isn't a last-second act of desperation. It's the payoff to years of preparation and family investment. And Victor's Village, in career districts, it's the ultimate neighborhood. Full, lively, aspirational. The houses aren't haunted reminders of who the capital took. They're status symbols. You see victors walking to the market, hosting parties, mentoring in those training halls. They're local royalty, not tragic outliers hiding at the edge of town. That part matters because it shows you the system working exactly as Snow intended. Victory looks achievable, repeatable, even hereditary. So why do these districts get away with open training when everyone else would be punished for it? The answer sits in those quiet arrangements with peacekeepers and capital officials. Better nutrition flows here. Access to specialized gyms and arenas is tolerated, even encouraged. No one is shutting down the sword class or confiscating the spears. The law against preparing for the games becomes a suggestion, selectively enforced to reward loyalty. The result is cultural. The games are woven into the identity of the district itself. You get festivals around the reaping instead of pure dread. Families bring out old capital broadcasts of their favorite victories. Schools brag that a certain victor trained in their program. When the names are called, there's an expectation. Of course, our district will do well. Of course, we'll bring home another victor and another year of extra rations and celebrations. So why is this so dangerous? Because the capital has taken a tool of oppression and turned it into a dream. Some of the very people being exploited are now competing enthusiastically for the chance to serve. The games don't just control their future, they define their ambition. And once you have whole districts whose pride is tied to arena performance, what happens when those same victors start questioning the system that made them? We're going to cover how that loyalty fractures next, and why the capital's perfect districts become some of its biggest long-term problems. Training, privilege, and the making of a career tribute. So what does that loyalty look like on the ground day to day when you grow up in a career district? You don't just go to school, you go to prep for the games. This is where we talk about the way ordinary childhood gets rewritten. Your sports period isn't just about fitness. It's obstacle courses that suspiciously resemble arenas, hand-to-hand drills, scored like tournaments, archery and sword work framed as harmless competition. At face value, it's PE. In reality, it's a pipeline. The best kids aren't just popular, they're already halfway to tribute status. History class, there is a lot to uncover here. You're not studying the causes of the dark days. You're memorizing highlight reels of past victors from your district, reciting kill counts and clever tactics the way other schools might recite poetry. The teacher doesn't say, "This was horrifying." They say, "This is our legacy." That part matters because it turns survival horror into civic pride, and your social status is tied to your body. You're faster, stronger, better with a spear. You're treated as future wealth. Parents nudge their kids towards those combat clubs the way ambitious families in our world might push debate team or advanced math. The relationship between athleticism and ambition is completely rewritten around the arena. So why do families participate in this? Here's the real question. If you know the games are a death sentence, why would you ever encourage your child to get closer? The answer is brutal and in their context rational. In Districts 1, 2, and 4, Victor's Village isn't an abstract promise on a screen. It's right there. You walk past manicured lawns, working fountains, real glass windows. You see the big houses that always have power when the rest of the district goes dark. Parents quietly do the math. One child succeeds, and the whole bloodline steps out of hunger, out of the reaping, into generational safety. So some families push, not openly, not "you must go die for the capital," but "you're talented, you could really win. Imagine never worrying about Tesserae again." The games become a twisted scholarship program with a 90-something% fatality rate. For kids, that full, thriving Victor's Village is proof of concept. People from here win, people from here get out. When every schoolyard story ends with, "And then she moved to the village," volunteering stops feeling suicidal and starts feeling strategic. And that changes peer culture in a big way. Aspiring tributes become local celebrities before their names are ever in a glass bowl. They train in front of an audience. Younger kids ask for tips. Not volunteering when you're clearly good enough can read as cowardly or unambitious. The social pressure does half the capital's work. So why would the capital risk it? Why allow entire districts to specialize in producing the deadliest, most capable fighters in Panem? If the system is so effective at control, what happens when those same career tributes finally turn all that training on the people who designed it? We're going to cover how that calculus backfires next, and why the capital's greatest asset quietly becomes its most dangerous mistake. Celebrating the bloodbath, normalizing the unthinkable. So what happens when that training district strategy actually works? When your kids don't just survive the arena once in a blue moon, but keep coming home in crowns? This is where we talk about how the bloodbath stops feeling like a massacre and starts feeling like a season. From a career district's perspective, the games calendar isn't just dread, it's pageantry. The tribute parade? At face value, it's a national showcase of terror. But if you're in District 1 or 2, it's also a runway. Your stylists always deliver, your tributes stand tall instead of shaking, and the cameras linger just a little longer. Parents nudge their kids and say, "See, that could be you." That part matters because it turns a death march into a local bragging right. Then you add the victory tours. To most districts, those are state-mandated funerals with a victor as the centerpiece. In a career district, they're closer to homecoming games. You pack the square, You hang banners, you remember the exact moment your tribute took out that other kid at the cornucopia. The capital broadcasts grief and glory in the same frame, and your district quietly leans toward the glory. Here's the real question. What does repeated winning actually do to a culture? Because once you have multiple victors, you don't just have trophies. You have infrastructure. More victors mean more mentors, more strategy sessions, more stories told to wide-eyed 10-year-olds about the year we dominated the arena. Every game season, your district gets extra screen time, extra interviews, extra narrative control. That creates a feedback loop. The more you win, the more your identity fuses with the games themselves. If you're from District 4, you don't just fish, you produce champions. Your victors sit in the front row of every reaping, your kids train in official-looking facilities, and the capital quietly rewards your cooperation with subtle perks and constant visibility. And all of that orbits one physical symbol: Victor's Village. In a career district, the village isn't some eerie, half-empty suburb, it's the stage. During game season, that's where the feasts happen, where the cameras pan over glowing windows and full tables, where returning victors step onto decorated porches to wave at the crowd. You don't just walk past it on your way to work, you pilgrimage there to celebrate. Pattern interrupt. Step back for a second. We're talking about children killing each other for entertainment, and yet entire districts are hosting watch parties and cheering specific kill counts. How do you get there? You get there when the system rewards you so consistently that the moral frame shifts. The games stop being an atrocity imposed from above and start reading as a test of excellence your people are uniquely good at. And that's the point. The capital doesn't just want obedience, it wants emotional investment. It wants you arguing over strategy, ranking tributes, defending your victor on national broadcasts. Because once your pride, your stories, even your district holidays are tied to the arena, walking away from the games doesn't just mean defying power. It means tearing out a piece of who you think you are. So when that system finally cracks, and those same career districts start questioning their role, that's not a minor shift. That's the capital's entire cultural weapon turning around. And we're going to cover how that reversal becomes one of Snow's worst miscalculations next. Why allow volunteers at all? And that's where the whole system gets shaky, because if the career districts start asking why they're proud of feeding their children into an arena, you have to zoom out and ask an even bigger question. Why does the capital let them volunteer in the first place? Think about it. A purely terror-based regime doesn't host a televised talent show for child murder. It drafts at random, forbids training, and crushes any sign of enthusiasm. No cheering at the reaping, no academies, no glossy interviews, just fear. So why does Snow do the opposite in some districts? Why encourage careers? Why let a Katniss step forward at all? At face value, volunteering looks risky for the capital. It adds emotion, unpredictability, even the possibility of symbolic gestures of love or defiance. That part matters because those gestures are exactly what end up destabilizing the games later. So here's the real question. If all you want is obedience, why build this elaborate culture of choice around an event that's supposed to be punishment? Imagine an alternate Panem for a second. No victors' villages, no mentoring, no volunteers. Each year, the capital announces that 12 children from each district were executed off-screen as a reminder of the dark days. Maybe you get a short, grainy broadcast of firing squads. No pageantry, no arena, no chance to win anything. That would be simpler, cheaper, cleaner. No need to transport tributes, train them or maintain arenas that can flood, burn and mutate on command. If the games were only about terror, Snow could have pivoted to an annual mass execution ritual and called it a day. So why doesn't he? Because the capital doesn't just want bodies in line. It wants minds that have internalized the games as natural, even meaningful. This is where we talk about control as a story, not just a gun. When you allow volunteers, when you dangle Victor's Village and district-wide food deliveries, you turn a massacre into a system people participate in. You give them a role. Parents train children. Districts fund academies. Kids fantasize about being chosen, not just fear being chosen. The relationship to the games shifts from how do we end this to how do we win this. That's a very different political landscape. Allowing volunteers creates the illusion of agency. You can't stop the reaping, but maybe you can step in. Maybe you can game the Tesserae odds. Maybe, if you're from 1 or 2, you can train your whole life and treat the arena as a career path. There is a lot to uncover here, but the core reason is stability. Controlled choice is more durable than naked coercion. And Snow knows it. That's why he invests in Victor's villages, in parades, in interviews. He's not just threatening the districts, he's teaching them to invest hope into the very thing that oppresses them. Which brings us straight to his most famous line about hope and fear. In the next section, we're going to cover how Victor's village, volunteering, and the game's entire design are built to manufacture exactly the little hope Snow thinks he can control, and what happens when that hope stops obeying. Hope versus fear. Snow's favorite equation, Snow, actually spells out his whole strategy for you. In that balcony scene with Seneca Crane, he doesn't talk about peacekeepers, or bombs, or mass executions. He talks about hope. Hope. It is the only thing stronger than fear. And then, the crucial part. A little hope is effective. A lot of hope is dangerous. That part matters because it tells you the exact equation the capital is solving for. Too much fear, people snap. They get desperate. If the Hunger Games were only about terror, the capital could just stage public executions in every district square, no arenas, no stylists, no Victor's Village at all. At face value, that would be cheaper and more efficient. So why don't they do that? Because a regime that leans only on fear ends up with citizens who feel they have nothing left to lose. And once you have nothing left to lose, rebellion stops being a risk. It becomes the only rational option. So here's the real question. If pure fear is unstable and too much hope is explosive, what kind of system do you build if you want people to police themselves forever? This is where we talk about the game's structure plus Victor's Village as one machine, one arena, one Victor, one mansion, one family pulled out of poverty while every other family watches their child die on national television. That's not random cruelty. That's carefully controlled hope. Every reaping, the promise is right there in front of you. Your kid could be the one. Your district could get the food, the celebration, the brief economic high that comes with a win. The relationship between horror and reward is the point. The games don't say, this could all end if you rise up. They say, this could all work for you if you play along. So, what lesson do people learn growing up under that? Don't hope for the end of the games. Hope to win them. The future stops being a question of collective liberation and becomes a lottery of individual escape. You don't dream of overthrowing the arena. You dream of getting good enough with a bow, or a sword, or your public persona to survive it. Victor's Village is the physical embodiment of that lesson, a tiny island of comfort in a sea of coal dust, or starvation, or factory smoke. Children in the district can see the big houses on the hill, see the electricity that never shuts off, see the victors exempt from the reaping. They can't access it, but they can't ignore it either. And there is a lot to uncover here, because those mansions don't just prove that the system is brutal, they prove that the system can work for someone. They whisper that the capital keeps its promises as long as you play by capital rules. So what happens when the games themselves start breaking that promise and hope stops staying in its little box? Spectacle instead of slaughter. Why the arena beats the firing squad. So when that promise starts to crack, the capital has to double down on something else. Spectacle. Because if all they wanted was punishment, there's a much cheaper option. You don't need genetically engineered wolves and flaming dresses for a firing squad. You just line children up in the town square and shoot them. Terrifying? Absolutely. But here's the real question. How long does that terror actually last? A public execution hits you once. It's a spike of horror, then numbness, then silence. People avert their eyes, they go home. They try not to think about it. The relationship between citizen and state becomes simple. They hurt us. We fear them. That's effective, but it's blunt. The Hunger Games stretch that same violence over weeks. Suddenly, it's not one moment, it's a season. You don't just witness death, you follow a caste. You meet the baker's son, the girl with the bow, Rue from District 11 who reminds you of Prim. You watch interviews, costumes, training scores, and you start asking the wrong question. Not why are children dying, but who's going to win. That part matters because it shifts your brain from morality to prediction, from outrage to suspense. This is where we talk about national ritual. The games aren't just state violence, they're an event everyone in Panem is forced to share. Capital citizens throw parties, bet on odds, obsess over hairstyles. The districts huddle around flickering screens, sick to their stomachs, but they still have to watch. So the same broadcast that gives one group entertainment gives another group trauma, yet it forges a twisted kind of unity. Everyone knows the tributes' names. Everyone has an opinion. Everyone is participating, and the capital doesn't let the story reset each year. Victor's village turns winners into recurring characters. Haymitch isn't just a man in a house. He's the drunk mentor you recognize every games. Katniss and Peter don't disappear after the arena. They come back as mentors, as propaganda, as symbols. Their mansions become permanent reminders that the story never really ends. Back then, a victor might have faded into their district. Now each new games feels like the next chapter in an ongoing series you already follow. At face value, it looks generous. Fame, wealth, a house on the hill. But the real function is narrative continuity. The victor's body carries the cliffhanger from last season into the next. There is a lot to uncover here, because that ongoing story distracts you from the constant, every single year, 24 children go in, and almost all of them die, wrapped in costumes, interviews, and love stories. That mass execution becomes content. Katniss and Peter's star-crossed lover's arc is the perfect example. Their berry stunt is an act of rebellion, but the capital rushes to package it as romance. Suddenly the question isn't, should the games exist? It's, are they really in love? And that's the final trick. Hope versus fear. The spectacle keeps you talking about who might survive, what strategy could work, whether your district finally has a chance. Hope gets tied to a winner, not to ending the games at all. So why would you burn down the arena when the only future you've been taught to imagine is winning it? Manufactured hope. The village is a promise you'll never cash, so if the only future you're allowed to imagine is winning the arena, where do you put that fantasy? The capital gives it an address. Victor's Village. At face value, it's simple. Win the games, get a mansion. No more hunger, no more mines or factories, hot water on demand. But here's the real question. Why does the capital spend all this effort building and maintaining a luxury neighborhood almost no one will ever use? This is where we talk about manufactured hope. Watch a victory tour broadcast in your head. The cameras don't just follow the train, they drift almost lazily over the village. They linger on the fresh paint, the glass windows, the full tables. They cut to a smiling victor at their door, maybe with family, maybe with a baby on the hip, framed in plenty. The relationship the capital is selling isn't you versus them. It's you and your district versus your own odds. There is a lot to uncover here because statistically, that promise is a lie. In most districts, in most lifetimes, 0 people you know will ever live there. 12 houses in District 12. 2, maybe 3 actually occupied. The rest are empty shells, but the camera never tells you that. The math doesn't matter. The image does. So why build it at all? Because the mere existence of the village keeps the fantasy alive that someone might get out. Not everyone, not together, just someone. A single name pulled out of the horror and dropped into a gated suburb. That part matters because it changes what people do with their fear. Instead of asking, how do we end the games? Some parents start asking, what if my child could be strong enough to win? Instead of organizing, you start training. Instead of plotting rebellion, you're pricing out the odds of a miracle. And the capital feeds that. They show District 1 and 2 careers touring their pristine villages, proof that if you play along, if you raise your kids for the arena, there's a real reward. You can almost hear Snow's logic. A little hope is more efficient than constant terror. Terror makes you desperate. Hope makes you patient. But it's a very specific kind of hope. It's not hope for justice. It's not hope that no one's children will die in the games. It's hope that if someone has to be spared, it will be yours. Manufactured, rationed hope. 1 victor per year, 1 village per district, 1 family pulled above the rest. That's the cruelty baked into the promise. You're not dreaming of ending the system. You're dreaming of being the exception to it, even if that means leaving everyone else behind in the same nightmare. So if the village is the carrot, what happens when someone actually reaches it? What concrete rewards does it deliver? And how do those rewards quietly rewire the entire district around its victors? Inside the mansion, what a victor really wins you step through the front door, and the first thing that hits you isn't the space, it's the silence. No coughing from the next room, no baby crying through the wall, no mine sirens, no factory whistles, just a hallway, too wide, with lights that turn on when you flip a switch instead of when the sun cooperates. At face value, this is the dream the games dangle in front of every district kid. Running water, hot on command, a bathroom that actually works, multiple bedrooms you don't have to share. The kitchen is the real shock. A refrigerator that hums because it's full, not because you're imagining it. A pantry stocked by the capital with canned goods, flour, sugar, coffee. In District 12, Katniss walks through her new house, stunned by appliances she doesn't even know how to use, because there is a lot to uncover here about what reward means when your baseline is starvation. The house itself is propaganda in wood and brick. Every cupboard says, this is what obedience can buy you. And it's not just the house. Winning the games comes with a permanent income pipeline. Regular shipments, a victor's allowance, better access to medicine that never makes it to the seam or the hob. Your family stops worrying about the next mine accident or the next bad harvest wiping you out. When the district hits an economic shock, you're insulated. While everyone else queues for grain, you're the one person who can always put food on the table. That part matters because it changes your relationship to risk. If your sibling gets sick, the capital's doctors are suddenly more reachable. If peacekeepers crack down, they're a little more careful around the victor's door. You're not untouchable, but you're noticeably cushioned. Merchants extend credit, peacekeepers defer, or at least hesitate. District officials treat you as a local asset, the living proof that the system works. Socially, you become a minor monarch. Children stare when you walk through the square. Adults lower their voices. Even in a place as poor as District 12, people bring you their questions about the capital, about the arena, about whether their kid has a chance. We're going to cover how this celebrity turns victors into informal spokespeople, but you can already see the outline. The capital doesn't need every citizen to love it. It just needs every district to have one person too invested to walk away easily. Here's the real question. What does that do to your head when you know all of this sits on top of the bodies you stepped over to get here? For the victor's family, the village feels miraculous. Misses. Everdeen goes from selling herbs for pennies to living in a mansion on a hill, and the psychological whiplash is enormous. Safety becomes fused with the capital's continued approval. If the games end, does the food stop? If you step out of line, do the medicines vanish? The reward is designed to feel conditional, even when no one says it out loud. And then there's the fine print. You don't just win a house, you win a job. Mentorship is mandatory. Every year you go back to the capital, back to the parade, back to the interviews, forced to help train the next kids from your district who will probably die in front of you. This is where we talk about the hidden costs, the capital appearances, the parties, the expectation that you'll smile on cue and sell whatever narrative they hand you. You're given a direct line to the capital, but that phone only really rings one way. Because your comfort depends on playing your role correctly, every luxury is also a leash. Hamich's decaying house in the books is the clearest visual. Power, appliances, a stocked cellar, and a man who drinks himself into oblivion because even his freedom is curated. The village promises escape from the games, yet every winter you're shipped back into their heart as living proof they're worth it. So here's the next question. If victors are this valuable and this controlled, what happens when the capital decides their trauma isn't a bug in the system, but a feature it can monetize and weaponize? Feasts, fireworks, and food parcels. How a whole district gets paid the capital doesn't just cash in on victors, it cuts the district in on the deal. The moment a tribute wins, the cameras don't stay in the arena, they swing back to the district square. Sirens, banners, hastily thrown together stages. You get public feasts that appear out of nowhere, vats of stew, fresh bread, even meat. For one night, the poorest people in Panem eat the way capital citizens snack during the broadcast. At face value, it looks generous. Your kid survives the games, and suddenly everyone gets a taste of victory. But here's the real question. Why reward the whole district when only one person actually fought? Why spend precious resources on people you're supposedly punishing? That part matters because the capital is buying something specific. Your cooperation with the story that the games can pay off. 1 year of horror, 1 night of abundance. The relationship is burned into everyone's brain. We're going to cover the long game here because the feast is just the opening act. After the cameras leave, the perks don't vanish completely. You see periodic food parcels, extra grain, maybe medicine shipments that mysteriously arrive on time for once. Trains that used to lose supplies on the way from the capital suddenly run a little smoother. As long as a district keeps producing victors, the capital keeps the faucet dripping. Not enough to end hunger, just enough to prove the system works, and it's never evenly shared. This is where we talk about who actually benefits. In District 12, the scene doesn't suddenly get permanent full bellies. The nicer part of town? The merchants? The officials orbiting the mayor? They're closer to the victor's village, closer to the distribution points, closer to the people the capital calls personally. The food parcels pass through their hands first. The best cuts, the warmest coats, the safest jobs cling to that inner circle around the victor. Visually, the capital makes sure the contrast is impossible to miss. You have the gleaming victor's village on a hill, with power, heat, and stocked pantries literally looking down on crumbling houses and empty coal bins. On victory night, the tables in the square are overflowing. Kids go to bed with full stomachs. 2 weeks later, you're back to trading squirrels for stale bread while those 12 untouched houses still glow in the distance. So what lesson are you supposed to learn from that? The reason this design is so effective is because it quietly answers the question of how to suffer less. Not through solidarity, not through rebellion, through playing the games well enough to win. The capital turns food into a political argument. Don't fight the system, maximize it. Even if your odds are terrible, hope is now tied to the arena, not to each other. And once your hope is wired that way, the capital can do something even darker with those rewards. Hope for winning, not ending the games. And once your hope is wired that way, the capital can do something even darker with those rewards. It can make you want to win the games more than you want the games to end. Think about what Victor's Village actually does to a district's imagination. At face value, it's a promise. Survive the arena, and your whole life changes. Your family moves from a shack to a mansion, full cupboards, hot water, safety from the reaping forever. Parents start doing the mental math. Not, how do we stop this? But, what are the odds my kid could be that one? That part matters because it quietly replaces one kind of dream with another. Instead of a world where no child has to go, you get a world where maybe your child doesn't have to go. The system stays. The risk stays. Only the fantasy of being the exception rotates through every kitchen table in every district. Here's the real question. What happens to rebellion when every family is busy calculating their own odds? Tesserae already force you into those brutal choices. More food means more entries, more risk. Victor's Village finishes the equation. Now there's a visible jackpot at the end of the horror, so you don't just fear the games, you invest in them. We're going to cover how effective that is. Because hope stops being collective, it becomes competitive. If you're praying for your kid to be drawn and somehow win, are you really going to burn down the system that might, maybe, save them? Or are you going to tell yourself, just 1 year, just one more chance? Then we'll think about change. This is where we talk about fragmentation. Districts can't unite when every household is emotionally hedging its bets. Career districts train children on purpose. Poor districts tell stories about that one victor who made it out. The relationship to the games becomes personal, not political. You're not asking why the capital has this power. You're asking how to survive under it. And the cruel irony is that victors themselves get trapped in the same logic. Their survival, their comfort, their family's safety, all of it is tied to the games continuing. They mentor, they sell the spectacle. They stand in the square every year, proof that the promise is real. How do you publicly call for an end to the thing that's keeping your loved ones alive? That's the capital's real victory. Not just winning the dark days, but convincing generation after generation that the games are the only imaginable future, the fixed point everything else orbits around. So if this system is so airtight, why does it start to crack? Why do victors, the people most invested in the promise, become the ones who help destroy it? And what happens when Victor's Village itself turns from a reward into a rebellion factory? That's where we're headed next. Book versus movie, two versions of Victor's Village, and here's where the adaptation itself starts behaving a little bit like the capital. On the page, Victor's Village in District 12 is not glamorous. It's eerily empty. 12 houses, 3 occupied. You walk through it and it feels wrong. Too quiet. No children in the street, no market noise. Just wind and that sense of something built for a future that never came. The paint is already peeling, Haymitch's place is a mess, and even the working electricity feels off when you remember most of the district lives in the seam without enough food. At face value, it's a reward. A house, heat, hot water, full cupboards. But here's the real question: why does it feel so dead? Collins keeps you in Katniss's head long enough that you realize the real architecture isn't the houses, it's the isolation. The village is physically set apart on a hill, but the real wall is psychological. You're a victor, but you're also a permanent reminder of the games, so you don't quite belong with the district anymore, and you definitely don't belong to the capital either. Now jump to the movies. The first time we see Victor's village on screen, it's almost cozy. Picturesque houses, fresh snow, clean lines, warm lighting. The framing is wide and symmetrical, the kind of shot you'd see in a real estate ad. For a second, you could almost believe the promise. Win the games, escape poverty, get your own little suburban fantasy. But watch what the films do over time. Early on, the camera glides. The sound is soft. You hear crackling fires and quiet interiors. By catching fire, those same angles feel colder. There's more empty space in the frame, harsher daylight, the fence humming in the background. When peacekeepers flood in, or Snow's roses appear, the village suddenly reads as a stage, not a home. The set hasn't changed much. The mood has. That part matters because it mirrors the rebellion. What once sold hope now radiates surveillance. So what's really going on here? The books lean hard into psychological imprisonment. We're going to cover Katniss hiding in an empty house when the fence goes live, her pacing through silent streets, the way every appliance just reminds her she's been bought. The relationship between Victor and District feels strained and haunted. You feel the loneliness more than the luxury. The films, though, emphasize visual contrast, poverty versus privilege, seam versus snow-covered cottages. They need you to see instantly why a starving kid might still dream of this place. The control is in the image. The capital would approve. And this is where we talk about us for a second. Pattern interrupt. If a movie can make an instrument of control look cozy depending on the lens, what about our own media? How often do camera angles, lighting, and soundtrack soften systems that, if you stood in them in person, would feel terrifying? Because the next step isn't just where victors live, it's how those homes survive when everything else burns. A day in the life of a victor. Freedom with a leash so when everything else burns and the village is what's left. What does an actual day there feel like? You wake up in a bed that's too soft, in a house that's too quiet. No mine whistle, no factory siren, no siblings arguing over a heel of bread, just running water, full power, and the knowledge that everyone in your district knows you're sleeping in while they go to work. At face value, that sounds amazing. In practice, it's a wedge. You step outside. Maybe this is District 12, with its neat row of 12 houses on the hill. Maybe it's a fishing district, where the victors' homes overlook the docks, or a textile district, where their windows face the looms they'll never touch again. The townspeople glance up. Some wave, because your win brought food and celebrations. Some look away, because your survival is the reason their child didn't come home. That part matters because every interaction reminds you. Your existence is a walking reminder of the games. Any victor will tell you the games don't end when you win. Breakfast might be quiet, but the screen is never really off. Replays, highlight reels. Capital pundits debating strategy from your year as if your trauma were a sports match. And even in the off-season, you're mentoring in your head because you know the question is coming. Who are you sending to die next? This is where we talk about the mentoring cycle. Every year, you're pulled back to the capital. You train new tributes, walk them through weapons, alliances, interview posture. You teach them how to charm Caesar Flickerman so sponsors will actually care when they're bleeding out. Then you sit in a luxury box and watch them die on live television while your district watches you watching them. The relationship between reward and punishment collapses in real time, and the capital doesn't stop at mentoring. There are mandatory appearances in your district, ribbon cuttings, school visits where you're supposed to sell the promise of hope. Look how well the victor lives. Kids. There are product endorsements in the capital, ridiculous perfumes or weapons, or fashion lines using your arena persona. If you're unlucky, you end up in Finnick O'Dare's position. Paraded as a sexual commodity, passed around to powerful capital citizens, while Snow holds blackmail over everyone you care about. Here's the real question. Is that freedom, or a different kind of prison? Over time, the psychological toll compounds. You're physically separated from your old neighborhood, so the people who knew you before the games now see you through a camera lens and a security fence. Survivor's guilt keeps you up at night. PTSD means you can't walk past a wooded area or loudspeaker without flinching. And you know the reason you're kept comfortable is so your face can keep selling the games as a system that works. So when we're going to cover Victor's Village as a reward, we have to say it plainly. It isn't a retirement home. It's a gilded holding pen for assets the capital can't afford to let roam free. But what happens when those assets stop playing their assigned roles? Victors as propaganda, selling the capital's story. They don't just stop playing their roles. They get rewritten. Any victor will tell you the games don't end when the cannon sounds. They just move to a different arena. Here's the real question. If Victor's Village is the physical stage, how do you turn the people living in it into walking, talking advertisements for the system that broke them? This is where we talk about curation. The capital doesn't present victors. It edits them. Every backstory is sliced up into marketable traits: romance, bravery, loyalty, sacrifice. The trauma, the resentment, the nightmares that keep you up in that big, empty mansion. Those get trimmed out in the broadcast cut or turned into a quirky detail to make you relatable. The relationship between who you are and who you're allowed to be on screen is completely controlled. Katniss and Peter are the clearest example. At face value, the star-crossed lovers narrative is sweet. Two kids from a starving district, choosing each other over survival. But that part matters because their double suicide berries stunt is not a love story. It's an act of political defiance that forces the capital to back down in front of the whole nation. So why doesn't Snow just crush them? Because it's safer to reframe the rebellion as romance than to admit the games can be beaten. So suddenly, every interview, every victory tour speech, every shot of them in Victor's Village is about devotion, not dissent. The question stops being, why did they challenge the rules, and becomes, will they get married? You watch how the capital sells it. The games didn't fail. They produced a fairy tale couple. Hope is redirected away from resistance and into wedding dresses and baby rumors. Finnick O'Dare shows you the darker version of the same strategy. On camera, he's the capital's golden boy, trident in hand, sugar cubes, perfect smile. A sex symbol instead of a sex slave. There is a lot to uncover here, because his entire persona is weaponized to distract the capital audience with power and pleasure, while hiding the blackmail, the abuse, the way Snow trades his body as a political favor. The message to the districts is simple. Even your most promising victor can be turned into a commodity. And then there are the victory tours. On paper, they're a chance to thank the districts. In practice, they're propaganda roadshows. You're paraded past grieving families to inspire them with proof that the system rewards excellence and obedience. The capital cameras linger on the fancy clothes, the polished speeches, the cheering crowds that have no real choice but to cheer. Back home, Victor's Village becomes the permanent set. That mansion isn't just a home, It's a backdrop. Every interview in your gleaming kitchen, every photo op on your front steps, every broadcast of you mentoring new tributes says the same thing. This is what loyalty looks like. So what happens when a victor stops smiling in that frame and starts slipping other messages through instead? When the system backfires, victors who hate the game. So what happens when a victor stops smiling in that frame and starts slipping other messages through instead? Here's the real question. If the whole point of the games is control, why design a system that regularly manufactures traumatized, highly skilled killers who have every personal reason to hate the capital? You're not just creating celebrities, you're creating people who know the arena better than the game makers and who owe the regime nothing but pain. On paper, it sounds efficient. One winner, endless propaganda, the promise that anyone in any district could make it if the odds are in their favor. But there is a lot to uncover here, because the same arena that breaks most tributes also forges a handful of people who learn to think tactically under pressure, read an audience, and survive impossible situations. Those are the exact traits you'd want in a revolutionary. This is where we talk about Haymitch. At face value, he's the drunk in the decaying mansion, a cautionary tale. But watch what he actually does. He turns mentoring into subversion. He plays the Capital's game on camera, then spends the rest of his time building quiet relationships with other victors, mapping out where the force field ends, and eventually coordinating the rescue of Katniss from the Quarterquell. The man everyone is supposed to underestimate becomes the architect of sabotage. Johanna takes a different route. She doesn't just hate the games. She broadcasts that hatred. In Catching Fire, she strips in the elevator, mocks capital etiquette, and later uses her axe not just on enemies, but on the arena itself, taking down the tree to help BT's plan. Her open hostility is dangerous precisely because she's a victor. You can't just erase her without people asking questions. Children in her district watched her win. They know her face. Then you have BT, the quiet tech genius who should have been a perfect capital asset. Instead, he becomes the brain behind the literal rewiring of the system. He weaponizes the arena's clock, then later hijacks capital broadcasts. That part matters because it shows how a victor's talent can flip from entertainment to outright treason the second their loyalty shifts. And of course, Katniss. The Mockingjay is the nightmare version of Snow's own strategy. She's charismatic on camera, beloved in her district, and already a symbol before she ever agrees to be one. The games teach her how to perform for an audience and how to read the Capital's hunger for narrative. She turns both against them. Why are these people so dangerous? Because their status as victors gives them leverage ordinary rebels don't have. They're famous. They have direct lines to the Capital, contacts with stylists, sponsors, other districts' champions. Every appearance is a potential broadcast. Every slip of the tongue is a potential spark. And that's Snow's core design flaw. The qualities that make good TV, charisma, resilience, stubborn will, also make excellent revolutionaries when you push them too far. So if a single angry victor can destabilize the narrative, what happens when an entire district or a hidden faction decides to weaponize that risk on purpose? District 13's hack, turning the games against the Capital District 13, is the answer to that question. Because if one angry victor is dangerous, what do you call an underground government that decides to run its own Hunger Games without an arena? This is where we talk about 13's smartest move. They don't reject the Capital's media machine. They reverse engineer it. They've watched for 75 years as the games turned death into appointment television, as victors became household names, as one girl with a handful of berries nearly toppled a regime. So instead of saying, "Turn it all off," they say, "Fine, we'll run our own show." That's what the Propos are. At face value, they're just Rebel commercials. But here's the real question. Why do they look and feel so much like capital broadcasts? Dramatic music, stylized outfits, slow-motion explosions, tight close-ups on Katniss's face. 13 understands the relationship between spectacle and power. If the capital trained Panem to respond to a certain visual language, you don't throw that away. You hijack it. And that's why Katniss isn't chosen as the Mockingjay just because she can shoot an arrow. District 13 has plenty of soldiers. What they don't have is a victor whose image is already burned into every screen in every district and every capital penthouse. The reason she matters is that the games did the branding work for them. She's the girl on fire, the star-crossed lover, the two-time tribute who broke the rules and lived. Her face is Panem's shared memory. So when 13 puts her in Cinna's armor-inspired Mockingjay suit, when they film her against ruined district backdrops, they're doing capital media with the message flipped. The format is familiar, the dramatic reveal. The slogan, the carefully crafted pose. Only now, instead of selling compliance, it's selling rebellion. You're watching the same kind of commercial your brain has been trained to care about, but the product has changed from Snow's promise of order to Coin's promise of uprising. There is a lot to uncover here. The Capitol spent decades teaching people to care about victors, to follow their interviews, to cry over their deaths, to root for their romances. That part matters because emotional investment is transferable. If you already care whether Katniss survives the arena, how hard is it to care whether she survives a bombing raid? The games built the audience. 13 just changed the plot. And then there's Victor's village. When Katniss walks through her empty, bombed-out house in District 12, 13 turns it into a set. Apropos backdrop. The camera lingers on the pristine appliances, the untouched furniture, the white roses and ash. This was the Capitol's promise made concrete. Win, and you get this forever. Now it's a tomb. The dream suburb becomes a warning label. So when you see Katniss standing in the ruins of the village, armored as the Mockingjay, you're watching the Capitol's entire system collapse into a single image. The games promised safety through victory. The rebellion answers with a new promise. There is no safety until the games themselves end. And 13 isn't done yet. Because once you've weaponized one victor's image, what happens when you bring the others into the frame? Panem's power grid, underclass, elite, and the games in between. Because to understand what happens when you bring the other victors into the frame, you have to zoom out and look at the whole picture they're trapped inside. Panem isn't just a map of districts, it's a power grid. Energy flows one way, out of the districts, into the capital. Food from 11, coal from 12, lumber from 7, luxury goods and tech from the others. In return, the capital sends back not much. Some peacekeepers, some broadcasts, the annual promise that if you obey, you might not be the one watching your child walk to the stage. At face value, the Hunger Games are a punishment for the dark days. Snow even says it, a reminder of the Capitol's power. But here's the real question. If you only wanted obedience, why build an entire national sport around it? Why invest in stylists, mutts, high-tech arenas, and years of training when firing squads would be cheaper? This is where we talk about economic extraction. The games are the story that justifies the entire arrangement. The Capitol positions itself as the shield between districts and chaos. We keep the peace, we prevent another war, we deserve your grain and your coal as payment for that protection. Every reaping is a tax notice. Every cannon is an invoice. The relationship is framed as a debt the districts can never finish paying off. That part matters because it turns exploitation into duty. When District 12 freezes while the Capitol feasts, you're supposed to think, well, at least the peacekeepers keep us safe from each other. The games are the annual reminder of why you owe them, why the flow of resources only makes sense in one direction. Now drop Victor's Village into that system. On paper, it's a glitch in the matrix, a pocket of capital-level luxury, sitting in the poorest districts. But the reason it exists is brutally efficient. You create a tiny local elite whose comfort depends on the game's continuing. Haymitch has power, heating, steady shipments. Katniss's family never has to take Tesserae again. If you're a starving kid, that mansion isn't just a house. It's proof the games can work for you. So we're going to cover how that turns some of the oppressed into stakeholders. If your district wins, everyone gets a feast. Your victor brings in capital attention, maybe new factories, some infrastructure. Suddenly, the question isn't, why do we have games? It's, why can't we win them? And that's the last piece, division. Each arena has one victor slot. 23 districts lose. Instead of imagining a world without games, each district is pushed to imagine a world where their kid is the one on the train home. Careers in 1 and 2 train for it. 11 quietly roots for Rue. 12 clings to the hope that lightning might strike twice. So why do the games exist beyond punishment? Because they're the central ritual that makes this whole economic and social order feel inevitable. The capital doesn't just harvest resources. It harvests your imagination of what's possible. And once victors start breaking that script on camera, the power grid starts to flicker. So what happens when the current finally snaps? What the games really teach everyone, watching when that current snaps, it doesn't just shut off the arena, it shorts out the story everyone's been taught to live in. Because here's the real question, what are the games actually teaching you year after year before you ever step into a reaping square? At face value, it's punishment and reminder. But under that, the curriculum is brutal and very specific. Lesson 1. Some lives are expendable, not metaphorically, literally. 23 children per year are publicly marked as acceptable losses, and the system keeps running. The trains still move, the mines still open. No one in power pauses production. That part matters because it tells every district kid from age 5 on that the world keeps turning without you, and the capital decides whose death is meaningful. Lesson 2. Survival is a competition, not a relationship. The arena takes real scarcity in the districts and turns it into a televised game theory experiment. You don't win by building community, you win by outlasting, outkilling, out-entertaining. When Katniss and Peter choose berries over that script, it's not just romantic defiance. It's treason against the core rule, there can only be one. Lesson 3. Killing can be heroic as long as it serves the state or entertains the capital. Careers are literally trained to see slaughter as achievement. They get sponsors, interviews, fan mail. The message is clear. Violence isn't the problem. Unauthorized violence is. So what does that do to a 10-year-old in District 10? Or 4? Or 12? This is where we talk about imagination. When every year ends with a victor crowned for surviving state-sponsored murder, your future shrinks. You can be a miner, a farmer, a factory hand, maybe a peacekeeper, if you're lucky, or you can be a tribute. Those are the scripts. Anything else feels unrealistic, even before the capital bans it. There is a lot to uncover here, because the games don't just discipline behavior, they fence in possibility. You don't dream of becoming a scientist in District 3. You dream of not having your little sister's name pulled. Meanwhile, what are capital kids learning? They're trained to see district deaths as content, a fashion moment, a betting opportunity, background noise to their parties. The same footage that traumatizes Rue's neighbors becomes a fun group watch in a penthouse. When suffering is always framed as spectacle, inequality stops feeling like a moral crisis. and starts feeling like programming. If that feels uncomfortably familiar, it should. We have our own softer versions, sports where injured bodies become replays, reality TV built on humiliation, news cycles that turn disasters into rating spikes. We're going to cover why that comparison isn't one-to-one, but the rhyme is there. When pain is packaged as entertainment, empathy has to fight through editing. And then there's Victor's Village. It's not just a prize, it's a final lesson. Those mansions say extreme violence is a legitimate path to safety, status, and a full pantry. You walk past those empty houses in District 12, and you're reminded every day that the only visible escape route from poverty runs straight through the arena. So when victors start refusing the role, mentoring rebellions instead of tributes, that whole hidden curriculum starts to fall apart. But what does the capital do when its own teachers turn on the lesson plan? Imagining the unseen villages, district by district world building. So what happens when the teachers go rogue? This is where we talk about the capital's backup plan. You don't just build one Victor's Village, you build 12 different versions of the same promise. At face value, it's just copy-paste luxury housing. But here's the real question. If every district gets the same reward, why bother tailoring any of it at all? Because the village has to feel native. It has to feel possible. Snow can't sell hope in District 1 the same way he sells it in District 11. So we're going to cover this with a simple framework. Each village mirrors three things: the district's industry, its climate, and how much that district has bought into the games. District 1, high buy-in, career tributes, full relationship with capital culture. Their village is basically a miniature capital suburb, polished stone, glittering glass, imported fabrics, maybe even tiny boutiques that only victors can access. You're not just a survivor there, you're aspirational decor. Children in one don't just see a mansion, they see a pipeline from training hall to estate, a straight shot from volunteering to velvet. District 2 shifts the tone. Same core promise, different skin. Their village would feel more fortress than resort. Thick stone walls, reinforced doors, training yards built into the cul-de-sac. You can almost hear clove sharpening knives on the porch. That part matters because 2's victors double as enforcers. The capital wants them to imagine themselves as elite soldiers stationed at home. Now jump to District 4. Coastal, proud, still fairly loyal early on. I picture seaside villas, wide balconies facing the water, private docks. The game's reward is literally oceanfront property, an upgraded version of the life they already know. The capital isn't reinventing their dreams, just polishing them. District 7 is where it gets fun. There is a lot to uncover here. You take that same template and drop it into a forest. The mansions are huge but wood-built, polished beams, carved balustrades, massive hearths. Maybe the village is partially threaded into the trees with rope bridges or elevated walkways. Victors here are rugged folk heroes, the lumberjack legends who went into the arena and came back with axes and trauma instead of just splinters. Contrast that with District 11. Agriculture, harsh enforcement, almost no buy-in. Their village can't be a casual stroll away from the orchards. I imagine it walled off, literally fenced from the fields, with visible peacekeeper towers. Victors like Cedar, or whoever mentored Rue, would be watched constantly. Too much love from the workers. That's a security risk. So the capital turns their reward into a gilded holding pen. District 6 and 3 show you another angle: transport and technology. In 6, the village probably hugs the rail hub. Sleek trains humming past manicured lawns, victors trotted out for logistics campaigns about efficiency and loyalty. In 3, the houses sit near factories and labs, wired with extra tech, their victors pushed into propaganda about innovation and capital-approved progress. Different climates, different facades, different stories. But every village has the same job: to localize hope, to customize the fantasy just enough that each child can say, "Someone from here could win." And once you see that, you have to ask, what happens when those customized mascots start selling a different future instead? When the symbol breaks from stable ritual to revolution. So what happens when those customized mascots stop selling the capital's future and start selling their own? When the symbol you've been using to control people suddenly starts talking back. For decades, the games are a closed loop. Terror in the arena, tears at the reaping, a victory tour, a new mansion in the village. Fear goes in, ritual comes out. At face value, it works. Every district learns the same lesson. You probably won't win, but someone might. So don't burn the system down yet. That part matters because the ritual doesn't just punish rebellion, it schedules it, contains it, makes it predictable. Back then, the logic is simple. One arena, one victor, one house filled in the village. The scarcity is the point. If only one person can ever escape, then every child's hope gets funneled into the same narrow channel. Maybe it's me, maybe it's my neighbor, maybe our district gets a year of extra food. You don't question the rules, you just pray your odds improve. Then the 74th games happen, and the script breaks on live television. Two tributes from the same district, both still breathing, both holding those berries. You remember Snow's whole philosophy about a little hope? Katniss and Peter weaponize it. Their double victory doesn't just embarrass the capital, it attacks the core rule of the ritual. If there can be two winners, then the entire logic of the village, as a rare, exclusive reward, collapses. Why build 12 empty mansions if you might need more? Here's the real question. Once you've shown the audience that the rules can bend, how do you ever convince them they're sacred again? This is where we talk about the quarter quell. The 75th isn't just a twist, it's a confession. Reaping from the existing pool of victors exposes the fine print the capital never said out loud. Your mansion, your status, your supposed safety are revocable at any time. The games can reach back into the village and drag you out of retirement. There is a lot to uncover here, because that move tells every district the quiet truth. You can't win forever. There is no permanent escape. And once the promise of safety is revealed as a lie, the psychology flips. Victors who used to be advertisements for compliance become proof of betrayal. If even Haymitch, Finnick, Johanna can be thrown back in, what are you really working toward? In that moment, rebellion stops being a fantasy and starts being the only rational strategy. The physical symbol breaks too. Those shining mansions, they turn from prizes into targets. In District 8, in 7, in 12's ruins, the village isn't aspirational housing anymore. It's where you go to find the people planning the next move. The relationship reverses. The district doesn't look up to the victors. The victors look out for the district. So once the games lose their power to stabilize, why does Snow double down instead of shutting them off? That's where the real disaster starts. So why do the Hunger Games really exist? So once the games stop calming Panem and start lighting matches, why doesn't Snow cut his losses and cancel the whole thing? If the only purpose were punishment, ending them would be the safest move. Here's the real question. What if the Hunger Games were never primarily about payback at all, but about making rebellion feel mathematically impossible? At face value, the capital tells you the story. The dark days were chaos. The games are the reminder. You misbehaved, so every year 2 children pay. Simple, brutal, done. But there is a lot to uncover here, because the actual system wrapped around that arena does way more than remind anyone. First, the games manufacture a permanent underclass. The tesserae system wires hunger directly to the lottery, so the poorest families in every district are forced to buy food with extra chances to die. That part matters because it doesn't just scare you, it makes poverty self-reinforcing. You're desperate, so you take tesserae, so your odds go up, so your district quietly accepts that the same families lose children over and over. On top of that, the games carve out a tiny loyal elite inside each district. This is where we talk about Victor's Village again. Winning the games earns you a mansion, steady food, hot water, the promise of safety from the reaping. One victor, maybe 2 or 3 over decades, living in visible luxury while everyone else trudges past the fence to the mines or the looms. The relationship is engineered. You can't overthrow the capital, but maybe you can marry into that house on the hill. Victor's Village is the hinge that turns the games from pure terror into twisted opportunity. Hope gets redirected away from collective change and into individual escape. You don't dream of ending the games, you dream of your kid being the one who survives them. Snow literally explains this strategy. A little hope is effective. Too much is dangerous. So the village dangles just enough hope to keep the volunteering, the training, the quiet complicity going. Meanwhile, the capital turns state violence into addictive entertainment. The arena is a national ritual. Betting, styling, interviews, the star-crossed lovers narrative. They harvest ratings, products, propaganda, but more importantly, they harvest imagination. The games teach everyone, from capital fans to district children, to see the future in capital-approved terms. You are either a spectator, a sacrifice, or if you're impossibly lucky, a victor. That's the real goal. Not punishment, but psychic containment. If every path forward runs through the arena, then rebellion doesn't just seem dangerous. It feels unthinkable. Until Katniss and Peter prove there's a fourth option, refuse the script entirely. And once that idea exists, the system that depended on your imagination collapses from the inside. So how does Snow try to shut that idea down without admitting the game's failed? That's where the quarter quell twists come in. From Panem to us, what this system says about our world. Snow uses the quarter quells to patch the system from inside the story. But here's the real question. What does that system have to do with us, sitting on a couch, safely outside Panem? At face value, Panem is turned up to 11. Child death matches, fire dresses, a capital that literally drinks to vomit so it can keep eating. It's easy to say, well, that's fantasy, we'd never let that happen. But the logic underneath it, using spectacle, inequality, and carefully managed hope to keep a tiny group on top, that part matters because it's not just dystopian, it's familiar. Think about what the games actually are. A national event built on competition and elimination. One victor, 23 bodies, every district watching, betting, ranking, arguing over who deserves to win. Now zoom out. Where do you see that same structure in your world? Entire industries where thousands compete for one breakout role, one promotion, one scholarship, while everyone else quietly disappears off screen. This is where we talk about media that turns suffering into content. In Panem, the cameras never cut away from the wound. They zoom in. Tragedy becomes a highlight reel, edited with sponsorships and costume changes. We don't have mutts and force fields, but we do have reality shows, disaster clips, and true crime empires that turn real pain into entertainment. The question isn't, are we as bad as the capital? The question is, who benefits when we're trained to watch instead of act? There is a lot to uncover here in the way systems offer escape hatches instead of change. The capital's promise is simple. You could be a victor, Your district could get a feast. Your family could move to Victor's village, but only if you play. In our world, how often is the answer to inequality framed as work harder, be exceptional, win the game, instead of why is the game built this way in the first place? And this is important. The point isn't to say we live in the Hunger Games. We don't. But we can use the story as a lens. Who controls the arena? Who writes the rules? Who decides which futures feel realistic and which ones sound ungrateful, unprofessional, or unserious when you say them out loud? So what does hope look like in that context? Not just hoping to win under unfair rules, but hoping to change the rules. Hope as collective imagination instead of private fantasy. Hope as, what if nobody volunteered? Or what if the districts refused to watch? Rather than, what if I got picked and somehow survived? Here's the real question for you. If you woke up in Panem tomorrow, in your district, how would people quietly resist the game's logic? Would they refuse to bet, refuse to cheer, hide the broadcasts, share food so Tesserae lose their power, protect potential tributes together? Hold that thought, because we're going to cover how different districts already start doing versions of this, and how the capital scrambles to shut it down. Your district, your move. Join the village, because here's the twist. When you start asking how each district might quietly resist, you're already stepping outside the capital's script. At face value, the games are about punishment for a past rebellion. But we've just walked through the real architecture behind that story, from one tiny object on a girl's jacket to an entire country's sense of what's possible. We started with the Mockingjay pin, this accidental symbol that should have been harmless merch, and instead became a political problem. From there, we pulled back to Snow's design. The games as a yearly ritual that doesn't just kill 23 children, but rewires every victor, every district, every viewer into accepting that this is the natural order. That part matters because once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. We're going to cover a lot of ground in future videos, but in this one we traced how Victor's village sits right at the center of that pattern. Snow builds a mansion in every district, sells it as a promise, then uses it as a cage. We looked at the career districts, where kids are trained to chase that mansion, and at District 12, where Katniss walks through empty houses that prove the promise was always a lie. We watched the system crack. The Quarter Quell pulls victors back into the arena, the illusion of safety evaporates, and suddenly the games stop being a stabilizing myth and start being a countdown to rebellion. The capital doesn't just lose control of the narrative, it loses control of what people in Panem think can happen next. So here's the real question, boiled down to one line. Why do the Hunger Games exist? To control what people in Panem think is possible. And Victor's village is the prettiest lie holding that whole story together. Now I want to hear your version of Panem. If you had to pick, which district do you think you'd be from? And how would your district quietly resist? Would a fishing district accidentally sink capital shipments? Would a tech district introduce glitches into the broadcasts? Would a poorer district turn victory tours into funerals instead of celebrations? Tell me what small, believable resistance looks like where you are. If you want to keep unpacking this relationship between spectacle, punishment, and control, you're invited to stay. Think of this channel as our own Victor's village, minus the surveillance and mandatory interviews. If you're into deep dives on Panem's politics, other dystopian systems, and character-focused analysis, this is where we talk about all of that. Next up, I'm tempted to put Panem next to another control system. What happens when you compare the factions of Divergent to the districts or Snowpiercer's train to the games' arena? Which dystopian world do you want to dissect in this same way? Drop your suggestions, choose your district, and I'll see you in the next episode.